Hello. For this session, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Gabriel Bodard, at the School of Advanced Study at University of London, who is going to introduce us to the Oxygen integrated development environment. Gabby?
Great, thanks very much, Christopher. So yes, for the workshops that we teach here at SAS, we generally recommend using the Oxygen XML Editor as your editing tool. You can, in principle, use any text editor, and there are several other text editors that are geared towards XML and other coding environments. So you can use those. Oxygen has a lot of very good functionality, especially for its price level. So we recommend this. So I'm just going to very quickly show you the interface here. Just a couple of things before we start. The very first time you open Oxygen, you'll get this welcome screen, which, unless you ask it to, will also appear every time you open Oxygen thereafter. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click this Show at Startup button down in the bottom left there. I'm going to unclick that checkbox and then close this, so we never need to get that welcome screen again. The second thing I'm going to do, just to show you this interface, is that very often when you're working in Oxygen, there will be all these docked windows on the left there and on the right there, some of which are useful sometimes, but I actually find they take up too much screen real estate, and I want this bit in the middle where the actual XML code will appear to have as much space as possible. I'm going to close every single one of these, so that the XML then fills the entire screen. Okay. A couple of notes about the appearance of this. I'm using for this demo, I'm using Oxygen version 24. So if you're using a different version, an older version or a newer version than that, you may have a very slightly different layout. And also that I'm using this on a Mac computer at the moment. So again, there may be some very slight differences based on that environment. For the purposes of this demo, I've set up a key capture tool that will show you in the bottom left corner whenever I press a command key. So if I press Command and A, the select all, you'll see Command and A appears there in the bottom left corner. Again, because I'm using a Mac, that command character that you appear, the little clover leaf, you probably want to replace that with Control for almost all commands on a Windows or a PC computer. So for purposes of this demo, I don't want to create an XML file entirely from scratch. What I'm going to suggest is that we're going to create a TEI XML file using the template that Oxygen already has and knows about. So I'm going to go to the File menu and select New. And from this list, I'm going to scroll down until I find TEI down here. And I'm just going to select all, the first item for me in the list of TEI schemas. There's all sorts of other options within TEI, as has been described before. TEI has all sorts of customization features available, but TEI all basically gives you access to all 500 and something elements of the TEI, and so basically any TEI, any valid TEI document will validate to that schema. Note that I've also made my font very large. The XML will look a lot smaller on your screen in the first instance. So creating this has created a template. This is the minimum validating TEI P5 document. It has the TEI header up here, and it has the text and the body down here. For purposes of this, I'm going to ignore the TEI header, and I'm just going to put some content in the body. But I just want to show a couple of other things. All these things up here in purple are instructions to the XML editor about things like what schema are being used and the fact that this is XML and so forth. So that can all be ignored. That's not part of the XML per se. That's just a set of instructions that we can ignore. So the first couple of things that Oxygen allows us to do. One is that You see it's nested these elements for us by default. So TEI is flush with a left margin. TEI header is indented a little bit up to the closing TEI header, and everything inside that is indented a little bit more. So that shows you the nesting, the tree format of the TEI of the XML quite neatly. If you want to find, if you're not sure where the TI header ends, you can select the entire TI header element, not just the opening tag, which you get by double clicking on it, but if you triple click on it, it selects the entire element for you up to the closing tag down here, and that gives you that helps you to find an entire element, and it can also be used for shorter elements, that if you want to select an entire element for some reason. It's slightly less fiddly than having to select it by hand by just dragging across. Another thing that Oxygen will do for you, you'll notice these little triangles in the left margin here. They're a little bit hard to see on the screen, but you'll see them on your own version. Those will hide an element for you. So the TI header, there's a lot going on there, and I've said I want to ignore the TI header for the moment. So if I click on that little triangle, the whole TI header is hidden. It keeps the first line, and you can see that 12 more lines are hidden in this from this at the moment. So we're just looking at the text. That's quite often a useful thing to be able to do, especially if you've got long elements that you no longer want to edit, and you want to be able to find the other parts quite quickly. But I'm going to unhide that for the moment, just so we don't forget that it's there. But I'm going to scroll down just to the body, the text and the body. A couple of notes. The main thing you want from a XML editor is the ability to validate your XML. So there's this button in Oxygen, this validate button, which gives you various different options. But just by default, if you click the button, you'll see validation in progress, and then validation successful has appeared down here at the bottom with a little green button next to it, and also in the top right hand corner of the screen up here, that thing there being green shows you that the entire document is valid. It will also validate as you go. So if, for example, I change body to bodil with a double L at the end of it, that's not a tag in TEI. It's still perfectly well-formed XML, but you'll see it's underlined in red, all the bits that it's got a problem with, and that green box down there for validation has gone red, and also in the top right hand corner, that square there has gone red. And you can also see down there the 3 things that are wrong with this document are marked in the scroll bar, so you can jump directly to them. Now you may notice one thing that happened there when I added the double L to the opening tag of the body element. The double L also appeared in the closing tag of the body element. This is something that that Oxygen does quite nicely. It assumes that if you make a change to the opening tag, then that change you'll want to be made to the closing tag as well. So if I wanted to change that entirely from body to front, I could just change it in the first tag, and it would change the second one as well. I don't actually want to do that, but just for the sake of argument there. There it is. If I make the change to the closing tag, however, and add double L there, it doesn't make the change to the opening tag at the same time. This is just a peculiarity of the way it works. And so now we've got a different kind of error. This isn't a validation error. This is a well-formedness error, because we've now got an opening body tag and a closing bodil tag, which no longer matches. So this is no longer good XML. So if I ask it to validate now, so validation progress, validation failed. The end tag for element body must end with delimiter. What it means is it doesn't like that closing tag because it doesn't match the opening tag. So I'll fix that by getting rid of that double L again, validate again, and it should say everything is fine. So that's just by way of keeping the giving you help keeping the file valid and well formed and so forth. In terms of adding further markup to your text, I'm going to add a bit more text to this file just for the purposes of experimentation with this. So I'm going to get rid of the sample text there. I'm going to paste in some new text that I've got. This is just the first couple of sections of Plato's Apology. I'm I'm just going to insert some markup in here. So the simplest way to insert some markup, to insert an XML tag into your text, is to simply type an opening angle bracket. When you type an opening angle bracket, that can only be the beginning of a new tag. So there's it then gives you a menu with all of the tags that are available at this point in an XML document. So at this point in a TEI document, with immediately inside a P paragraph element, there actually are a lot of elements that are available. So I can select from that list, or I can just carry on typing. If I know that in here I want to insert a milestone, I can just keep on typing, and it's now already figured out that the only element available that starts with the letters I wanted is milestone, so I can select it off that list, or I can just carry on typing. Once I get to the closing angle bracket, you'll see two things have happened. One is that the drop-down menu has disappeared because it's no longer needed because I've typed it without using it, and also that a closing tag /milestone has appeared immediately after it. So when you enter an element by hand like that, the closing tag appears immediately after it. So if you want to put text, if you want to have text inside your element, which I don't in this case, but if you did, then you can. You might want to use a different method of entering your text. Otherwise, you'll have to copy text from elsewhere into the inside of your element. But I'll show you that in a moment. So first thing we see here is that milestone is still underlined in red, and this is invalid. And the reason is that the element milestone is missing a required attribute unit. Okay, fine, let's add that attribute. How do you add an attribute to an XML tag? If you recall from the rules of XML, an attribute appears inside the opening tag of an element, and it was always separated from the element name by a space. So let's type in that space. It knows now that we're going to try and put in an attribute. So it opens the menu of all the attributes. And the attribute that we've been asked to enter is unit. So I'm going to type the first letter, U for unit, and there you can see it. I double click on it, it gives me unit equals, and the two sets of quotation marks so that I can put them immediately in there. So I don't know do we call this a chapter, a section? Let's just call it a section. Again, I could have just typed that. I didn't need to select it off the menu, but that's slightly simpler. So the milestone is an empty element. Milestone marks a point in the text at which something happens. So rather than you can enter that just as an open tag followed by a closing tag, but you can also represent an empty element by having the slash at the end of the opening tag. And notice what's happened there. The closing tag has disappeared. So I didn't have to delete the closing tag. I just had to type in the slash. Oxygen recognizes this is an empty element and doesn't need a closing tag. It gets rid of it for me. So if I say this is a section, and I want to give this a number attribute, an n attribute, and that's this section 17a. So what I'm saying is at this point in the text, section 17a begins. And so I've replaced the markup that was in the text, the 17a in square brackets, with this milestone element. Okay, and I can do the same for this one, although the simplest way to do that, rather than going through all the hassle of figuring out how to enter it again, would just be to copy and paste and change the A to a B. Laziness, as always, is a virtue when working. So that's one way to insert an element, just to put it in there and just to type it. So I could also just type the whole thing without using the menus at all. So if I delete 17C there and I just type milestone unit equals section n equals 17C. It takes a bit longer, but you can just type things in entirely by hand if you prefer. The other way to enter an element, and I'll use this to enter the fourth milestone for 17D down here, is to use the Command E or Control E on a PC, which opens up a tag window, which again gives you this menu of all the tags that you might want to enter. And here I want milestone, and I press enter. Again, it's put in the open milestone and the closed milestone tags, I can get rid of the closing one by making the opening one empty. And then again, I press space. And notice that when I press space, the two attributes at the top of that list are no longer in alphabetical order. They're the two most recent attributes that I've used in this document. So I can just select them from that list. I can select unit, section, and then when I press space again, N is at the top, and I select N, and it was 17D, I think. That second method for adding an element using Command E to insert it is particularly useful when I want to put this element around a span of text. So if I want to tag the word Athens, I want to say that is a place name. Okay. If I just type place name to the left of it, it'll give me the open tag and the closing tag, and Athens will be outside of that, and I'll have to drag it in, which is just an extra bit of hassle. So if instead of that, I want to, there's another instance of Athens a bit further down. If I use Command E to enter place name in here, it puts the opening tag before the highlighted text and the closing tag after the highlighted text. So that's inserted the text around my my text. The other advantage of using Command E is when you've entered some text using Command E, Oxygen remembers the last element you entered. If I enter an element by hand, just by typing the angle brackets, it doesn't do this, but if I've used Command E, then it remembers the last thing I've entered. And if I want to tag another instance of Athens, I can press, and again, watch the bottom left-hand corner of my screen, I press Command and the slash character, and it repeats the last element that I entered, in this case, another place name. So this is just by way of some instances of the sorts of things you can do using the Oxygen XML editor that you wouldn't be able to do if you were just using, you know, your text edit tool for this. But it doesn't change the format of the document. It's just some functionality to help you work with that. So that's all I was going to show for now. Christopher, is there anything else you think would be useful to show in Oxygen?
I was wondering if you might demo just for a second a really important feature that I use a lot, which is when you create an XML ID in an element, you can then hash use hash marks to refer back to that ID to interlink various things like anchor tags.
Great.
So if you could just show that, that might be useful.
Okay, yeah. So so there's among all the attributes that you can add to an XML document, I've got rid of the N for that milestone. Among all the attributes you can add, as well as all the TI attributes, there are at the end, there's a special set of XML attributes that are available in all XML documents, not only in TI documents. And one of those is XML ID. And an XML ID, an identifier, is a particular kind of string. It can't contain spaces. It has to begin with an alphabetic character. So if I just want to say this is, well, let's just say this is S17A, S for section. If I didn't begin with an S, it would be considered invalid because it can't begin with a number. Okay, so I have to put an S at the beginning of the ID there. So this then becomes the identifier for this milestone. So rather than just saying this is section number 17A, I'm saying I'm giving this an identifier that I can refer to elsewhere. And no two identifiers in the same document can have the same value. No two elements in the same document can have the same identifier. So if I change that N to an XML ID and I wanted to call that 17A as well, it would give me a validation error because 17A has already been defined, so I'd have to change that to 17B to represent that. So that's what an XML ID is. What Christopher was referring to was that you can then point back to, or point to an XML ID in the same document or in another document by using this the hash character to refer to the ID. And this means that I'm pointing to an element unambiguously, because there cannot be more than one element with that identifier. So on milestone 17B, I could add, say, the previous attribute, which has to contain an XML ID, a pointer to an XML ID. And you can see that it's saying, these are the XML IDs you've got in this document, which one do you want? And I don't have to choose one of these. I could choose something else, but I can choose now 17A as that. And so now what I'm now saying is this milestone is the one immediately following 17A. That may be obvious in this case, but in other cases it may not be. And you can also use this for making comments. You can use this as an apparatus. I'm referring to line 1, and you point to the ID for line 1. You can use this in bibliographical referencing, all sorts of ways where it's useful to give things identifiers. One of the most useful, the places where I use identifiers all the time is I give the document will have an author or an editor, and that author will have an ID. And then if I want to say, and so that's an ID for myself, and if I want to say this place name here, the person who identified this as a place name was me, I can put a pointer to that ID on there. So yeah. Thanks, Christopher. That's useful. And again, this is something that Oxygen does for you by saying, I know that you want an ID in here, so so I'm going to give you a list of all the IDs that I know of. And you may not use these. You can point to an ID in another document or something. But if it's the ones in this document you want, that's a really useful feature. Yeah, great.
Yeah. And Oxygen, as you said, is very good at learning based on your behavior what you might find useful in your encoding. But yeah, it's an extremely efficient way to keep track of entities that are labeled in such a way that you can refer back to them. One more thing that you might want to just mention briefly is why we also use Oxygen for the purposes of querying and transforming the data. And the Oxygen provides us a lot of infrastructure for doing stuff with the data as well.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's probably not something we want to show at this point, but I'm not. All sorts of functionality that you won't find in almost any other programming environment, except for some quite expensive XML editors. But I don't think there's any other very cheap XML editors that have the sort of functionality. So you can use a language called XPath to query your XML document. You can perform transformation scenarios, which have extensible style sheets for transformation that you can apply to one or a whole corpus of XML files to produce, for example, a HTML publication or a PDF publication coming out of the other end. There's all sorts of these functionalities that you can use in addition to this. So if you're just encoding XML files for your own use or as part of a larger project that someone else will take away and transform, or that we put into some publication environment, then using some other XML editor is absolutely fine. But if you're using this as part of an environment where you want to actually perform transformations and publication and processing on your XML files, Oxygen is going to be a really important part of your project's infrastructure. So yeah,
that's why.
And neither of us work for Oxygen. We're not advertising this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It gives you an all-in-one environment for querying and processing, which is a huge benefit to the software. Well, thank you very much. That was really informative and useful.
Cool. Great. Thank you.